roughly a $3.5 billion backlog. There are some folks from the Comptroller's Office that may be able to speak more specifically, I think, to your question. Some of those, it's my understanding that not all of those have been audited.
Okay.
In that number, anyway.
Just because, to Senator Hancock's point, if we're saying $90 million a year, that would be roughly 40 years worth of unpaid mandates at $90 million a year, if I did my math right. So.
Right. Or how many years have we been deferring and not paying? So how many years of mandates go into the $3.5 billion?
I don't have all the paperwork in front of me. I think we still have claims, unpaid claims, that go back to the very start of essentially the last decade. So there are some claims that are quite outstanding.
So okay. Well, it's hard to tell then what if the 200 million is more than enough or inadequate. I guess my other question is the money that we pay to reimburse mandates, is that within Prop 98?
Yes.
So it's a rearrangement of money within the Prop 98 guarantee, which would simply mean the diligent filers get more. Half of the people that never, the half of the districts that never submit mandate claims are essentially getting money taken away from them and given to the districts that do submit mandate claims. I have to think over really what the equity is there.
Right.
Because if we're not reimbursing every single solitary district for the second science course, we're basically subsidizing the districts that put in the claims and taking money from the districts that don't, if it's within the Prop 98 guarantee.
And as was noted, there may be other reasons why districts are not filing claims because they don't have expenses.
Yeah.
I could help clarify the difference between the 90 million that we're budgeting right now and the 3.3 billion backlog.
Please.
The 3.3 billion backlog is largely attributed to the graduation requirements claim because that mandate started in the 80s, but it was only determined to be a mandate in much later. And the cost estimate was there was a court case involved in 2004 that basically decided what the costs were going to be. So we sort of back owe for 10 or 15 years for that particular mandate is probably over $2 billion out of the 3.3 billion.
That's helpful.
So that's the difference between why the backlog is so high. Now, the administration is challenging in court the reimbursement methodology for the grad requirements claim, and if they prevail, then that backlog number would be reduced significantly.
Colleagues, we have yet to hear from the Comptroller and from the Commission itself, so if there are no other questions, we thank Ms. Gable and for your additional assistance. And thank the Superintendent for us.
Absolutely.
All right. So we have from the State Comptroller's Office, I believe, David O'Toole, Jill Kanemasu, and Jim Spano. Glad to see you all. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you, Chair and members. Dave O'Toole, the Comptroller's Policy Director. And thank you for inviting us to share our thoughts on the implementation of the Governor's proposal and our audit process in general.
Please.
With me today is Jim Spano, our Bureau Chief with our Division of Audits, and Jill Kanemasu on my right side here, Assistant Chief with the Division of Accounting and Reporting. Before I turn it over to my expert colleagues, I just want to make a couple of remarks. In general, we think the Comptroller's mandate proposal is achievable and can be implemented by our office. In eliminating and suspending and establishing a block grants could over time significantly reduce our education mandate audit workload. Nevertheless, we have questions about the block grant proposal and our ability to oversee the expenditure of state funds. And I know the LAO has recommended a working group, and we would welcome the opportunity to participate with that working group. We have worked with mandate audit-related working groups in the past. With that, I will turn it over to Jill.
Ms. Kanemasu, welcome.
Thank you, Chair and members. I'm Jill Kanemasu, Assistant Chief from the Controllers. The role of Division of Accounting and Reporting is mainly a support role. So basically, we develop and issue the claiming instructions once the Commission on State Mandates approves a mandate. And then we process the claims, perform desk reviews, and then make the payments when appropriations are made. And we also provide reports to the Legislature, Legislative Analyst's Office, and Department of Finance to help with those appropriation setting amounts. Just some comments regarding the governor's proposal. We agree with the comments the LAO and also your subcommittee on education has made regarding the proposal. And basically, the only question we have is about future mandates. If you impose new laws and they're unfunded and they go to the commission in a test claim process, what happens to those? And typically those go back for many years, depending on how long the test claim process takes, but typically around 4 to 5 years. So we welcome the opportunity to participate with you on implementing this legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members. I'm Jim Spano, the Bureau Chief with the Controller's Division of Audits. I'd like to convey some of our thoughts and questions about the Governor's proposal and an impact on the education mandated backlog from our audit perspective. One comment in the trailer bill is that it currently doesn't address penalties for when specific mandated activities or programs are not performed or partially performed, how the block grant funding will be reduced for areas of noncompliance, and who will be responsible for determining and making the funding adjustment. So that's an area we feel that probably needs to be considered. As to the impact on the Division of Audits, the Governor's proposal has no immediate impact on the SCO's backlog of audits. As we currently audit 3 to 4 years in arrears, we'll be auditing 2011-2012 claims and any new tax claims adopted by the Commission on State Mandates. Currently, right now, we're uncertain how many districts and county offices will choose to file mandate claims rather than apply and receive block grant funds. It is our understanding there are about 22 potential mandate programs excluded in the trailer bills, 17 pending mandate determination before the Commission, and there's another 5 which are close to final approval process. Therefore, at this point, we believe it's too early for us to determine the impact on our audit process for subsequent claims. We were also asked to talk briefly about the audit process. We perform desk reviews and field audits using a risk-based approach in selecting claims and programs for audits, and I believe earlier somebody asked how do we select audits. Basically, we looked at various criteria. We looked at significant high gross dollar value claims for individual mandated program, the cost itself. We look at high annual costs per enrollment for individual mandated program, and if a small district and large district are claiming the same costs, we'll take a look at the smaller district. We look at individual mandated programs with systemic claiming issues. We look at new mandated programs because those are uncertain, as there's some unclarity sometimes as what's reimbursable, so there's opportunities for errors. And then we look at results of past audits that we've done, both in general and in individual auditees that we audit. Generally, our audit covers a 3 to 7 years of claims at one time. Over the past 3 years for K-12 audits, the SEO has audited $89 million in claim cost and identified $61 million in audit adjustment. So over a 3-year time period, that's a 68% error rate. However, for the past year, the error rate was 55%. Currently, we're performing audits of approximately 5% of dollars claimed. Primarily, field audits issues relate to cost claim not reimbursable under the mandated program and unsupported cost claim. Related to non-reimbursable or ineligible cost, the biggest K-12 audit adjustments relates to the collective bargaining program, notification of truancy, the standardized testing reporting, and national norm reference achievement test. The collective bargaining, it's employees, non-reimbursable employees' time relating to collective bargaining or negotiation meetings. For the notification of truancy, it's non-compliant letters. And for the STAR testing and the national norm reference, it relates to tests being claimed that are not reimbursable under the mandate. Also, as Thomas Todd indicated, we also have some documentation issues in our audits right now. And generally what we do in the controller's office is that We like to work with the district to identify reimbursable cost when cost claim are estimated rather than supported with time records. And that is, sometimes if there's no documentation that exists to support cost claim, but we know that the costs were incurred, what we try to do is maybe utilize some type of alternative methodology, such as maybe using a time study currently and apply the results back to the audit period. In addition, right now, we also collaborate with school district and mandate claiming firms to clarify expectation for claims and answer questions about the mandate process. For example, we previously convened a mandate technical working group to discuss our expectation for claims and also discuss reimbursable activities.
Thank you, Mr. Spano. The question was raised earlier, given that we only audit 5% and 75% of those 5% are disclaimed, could we extrapolate the other 95%?
Sure, I can talk about it.
I would imagine probably not quite to that degree, but there's probably significant amount of money that we will save through efficiencies through the block grant program.
Sure, we've been asked that question in the past. Right now, is does our error rate, is it projectable to the population? The answer is no. And the reason for that is because we're not doing a random sample of school districts when we perform audits. What we're doing a risk-based approach. Sometimes there's systemic problems at a particular program. Sometimes it's a particular entity. Sometimes there's low-hanging fruits right now that we know it's wrong right off the bat, and we take those exceptions right now. So it's very hard. It's very hard to take the results of our audit and say that's something systemic statewide right now. It's very hard to do because we've been asked by finance before in the past right now, can we cut the appropriation based on that, and can we project it and cut everybody's claim? And unfortunately, an error made by one particular school district may not be representative of an error made by another school district.
Thank you for clarifying that. Senator Hancock.
Thank you. Could you just tell me what the funding is for your Bureau of Audits?
We have state general fund monies.
Yes. How much are they? Do you get $1 million? Do you get $20 million? I have no idea what your Bureau gets.
I probably need to get back to you on that question here, if I can.
Okay. And
if I may just jump in, we have about 34 auditors who are out doing this kind of work. So there may be in the low 3 to 4 million, just to give you a rough answer.
Okay.
But
No,
we can get you something better later.
Yeah, that's helpful. And when we discover that a school district has erroneously claimed, we just turn the claim down?
What we do right now is that if we go out to a school, sometimes we go out to a school district and there's no documentation, and basically what we try to do right now is we try to do the right thing right now. If we know for a fact that they incur the cost, we try to work with the district and come up with some means of measuring the reimbursable cost.
Okay. And unfortunately, I have to go, so I can't also. I'm learning a lot from this session. Let me put it this way. And I don't mean this at all disrespectfully. I am simply getting to wonder if all of this money is moving around within Prop 98, and if half the districts don't submit any claims, and how much money could we save if we weren't auditing people. I just remember once when I was working for the federal government, and we had some program where people began to say, look, we're spending $1 to save a nickel. Maybe we should put it back into the classroom. I don't, and as I said, you guys are doing a good job. It's nothing about what you do. I'm just thinking about the activities that the state undertakes, especially if we're not looking at malfeasance or anything. We're just looking at paying the people.
Well, you're making a good argument for the block grant proposal.
I think the block grant proposal is making more and more sense to me as I learn more about it. I mean, it seemed to make sense on the surface, but as I'm learning more, it seems to be making even more sense, and that's why I was asking these
We've
questions.
asked this of just about everyone else who's come up.
Yeah.
Would you argue for or against this parallel process, or just go with the clean block grant?
Yeah, I don't think we have a position yet on that.
We put you out of business. Not quite.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it's interesting with the block grant too. One of the things we're trying to figure out is is how are you ensuring that if the block grant goes out, and how are you ensuring that the activities really occur? And I know we've heard discussions about the audit guidelines, and so you're basically asking the independent auditors to verify the activity.
I would
occurred.
imagine there'd be a lot of watchdogs on the ground saying, we took block grant, but we're going to hear from folks in that district if the mandate was not performed. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'll have to spend much money to find that out. We'll find it out. Senator Emerson.
Your audit function does more than just audit school districts, I presume.
Yeah,
that's
local
correct.
agencies, yeah.
So I think a more accurate number is how much do you think the audit would cost, the 5% that you do, how much is each audit approximately? That's a more fair question rather than what is your budget for your audit?
Sure, I can address that. And Dave was right that our annual cost is roughly $3 million. I do have the information here. But what we do is we actually every year we take a look at how much cost we incur and what the dollar recovery is right now. And generally the reimbursement rate for school district audits has been 30 to 1, which is basically for every $1 we expend on mandated audits resources, we recover $30 back to the state general fund.
Yeah. Those are pretty good numbers.
Would that be the state general fund or Prop 98?
That would go back to the, I think Prop 98 reverts back to the state general funds. I believe the state general fund.
Well, thank you all. And Ms. Patton, we welcome you.
Thank you. Nancy Patton with the Commission on State Mandates. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. I will keep my remarks brief. I just wanted to clear up a few things, and I was asked to talk about our pending caseload and how that might affect this proposal. So I've heard today that there are 50 regulations out there that might be mandates and 50 test claims or 50 claims pending. It's not quite that bad. Just remember that short of the legislature funding mandates in the bills that they pass, the only process that we have right now for determining mandates is to file a claim with the Commission on State Mandates. So you're not going to have 50 regulations out there because they would have had to file a claim with us to analyze it, do a legal determination. So we have 17 pending test claims for school districts and 4 for community colleges. That's what's pending right now. So we don't know if those will be determined to be a mandate because we have not performed our legal analysis yet. We also have about 5 claims where we have determined that they're a partially reimbursable mandate, and sometime within the next, I would say, 6 months, we will adopt parameters and guidelines on those and statewide cost estimates, and that's when we notify the legislature of those programs. So I would just caution everyone as we're going through this process of looking at the block grant process to remember that those mandates are still there and that we still have a mandates process for hearing new claims. And I don't, I'm echoing other people's sentiments that we haven't really looked at that.
And I know the Department of Finance has said that that is an issue that needs to be addressed, and they're not ignoring it. How far back, how many years back do some of these 17 go?
Our oldest claim is from 2002. We have one left from 2002, and that will be done at the May hearing coming up. The rest of the claims from there are late 2003 through 2011.
And without begging too much detail, what does your process look like? How do you make this determination?
Well, we need to meet court standards when we do an analysis. It's the court case from Topanga. So we do a full legal analysis of each code section and regulation that is pled in the test claim. I think a common misconception is that a test claim comes in and it's on one statute or one regulation or one executive order, when in fact the 2002 claims had probably 5,000 regulations in them. Then we have to make a legal finding on every single one of those. So that has been sort of the main part of the problem with our backlog. But remember, the law changed in 2002 and 3 claimants can no longer file test claims going all the way back to 1975. They can only file them back within a year of incurring costs or a year of the operative date of the statute. So the newer test claims are much smaller. You're not going to have 5,000 regulations in there.
When you get that one done, you'll move quickly.
That's right.
All right.
Hopefully.
Very good. Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patton. That concludes our agenda, short of anyone else who might like to speak at public comment. I'm sure there are not many.
We didn't say that quick enough.
I'm going to do a quick head count. Please do come forward. Given you've waited all day, it would be rather ingracious of us to tell you not to speak, but there are over 30 of you, so I'm going to ask if you could keep your comments to a minute, because we'll be here till at least 4:30, just as we are.
Fine. I'll begin.
Please proceed.
Estella Mew with the California Teachers Association. I wanted to comment on specifically the weighted student formula. We have yet to review the mandates details, and we'll come forth with comments on that at a later time. Given all the testimony we heard today, many of the superintendents here, including the PPIC report, took us back to the 2007 studies of getting down to facts, the Sonstelli, the Kurse, as they showed, Burson studies, that at the time that we're looking at the weighted student formula, all agreed that an infusion of added revenues would be needed to hold everyone harmless. And CTA's position is this is not the year. That we need more planning, we need more time, we need more revenues. We don't know what's going to happen to us in November given the governor's budget proposal. He's assuming revenues, but if that does not happen, then we have to regroup and do something very different. We think it's a worthy, definitely, we need to simplify the system, but given the major cuts we have experienced in the last 4 years, we believe that this plan needs more time. Perhaps a hybrid plan or moving into it very slowly would be a better way to go about it. But at this moment in time, we believe that we need more revenues in the system to make whatever system we decide or you decide to do in changing this formula, and it's a major change, to make it successful. When they started those, they did the studies, there was a comment on their report that said, the LAO told us this was the perfect time to do the weighted student formula because of all the incoming revenues that we'll be experiencing starting in 2008. And here we are in 2012, and we're not there. And so I would caution you to read that study because it was an LAO comment. And so we're looking forward to working with the legislature in planting, in reviewing. One major thing that no one mentioned today is that if we're going through to look at and really seriously do something, then we need to see more models and school runs on how the distribution would occur if you didn't have the revenues in there, or how the distribution would occur right now with the way we are, because the comparison is what we really need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Estelle. Estelle is special, so she got a little extra time. But I have to tell you, if everyone goes on as long, we'll be here till 6, not till 4:30. So if you could really please watch your length of your comments, please proceed.
I'm Michael Johnson, Assistant Superintendent of Business Services for Clovis Unified School District. I'm also the President-elect of California Association of School Business Officials. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. Full and timely state funding of all current and past mandated cost reimbursements is one of CASBO's funding priorities. CASBO has consistently supported systematic reforms to streamline the reimbursement process to provide more timely state reimbursements, guidelines, and to reduce costs and personnel time required to obtain reimbursement. Reform to ensure a fair and timely and open audit process, reform to impose restrictions and limits on the imposition of new state mandates. For these reasons, from the business official perspective, we appreciate the administration's efforts to implement reform. But as with any process is detailed, the devil is in those details. We do have questions and potential concerns. We are concerned with what would happen to the block grant funding in future years and the lack of a constitutional guarantee to fund the program. Would a district lose all of its block grant funding for failing to meet requirements of one of those mandate programs within the block grant?
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We're going to have to limit your comments.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Lance Gunnarsson. I am a board member of the California Industrial and Technology Education Association. I'm also their legislative liaison and a past president. I also am a teacher, a shop teacher for the last 15 years. And it occurs to me that I need to state the obvious sometimes. My wife says I have a master's degree in it, actually. And the obvious is we have a budget crisis. And the obvious that's being sometimes overlooked that I would like to remind everyone about is that one of the drivers of our economy is manufacturing. Indeed, the president is now touring, trying to strengthen manufacturing in this country, and more people are recognizing that we have to make things here. For every one job that a manufacturer creates, it creates 10 to 20 more jobs related to that manufacturer of that item. And yet, when we look at what's happened with our school system, well, let's just put it on the table. What does our school system value at the time? Since we're talking about categoricals, they value API, which does not include an industrial tech or career tech component. They value the UC admissions criteria, which does not include a CTE or ITE component.
Mr. Gunnarsson, we're going to have to ask you to conclude.
I'll conclude very quickly then. These are the drivers of our education system. We have a life preserver on. If we're not in the boat for career and technical education, we will drown. It will go away. Without some kind of theme for this funding, those schools will do what they are mandated to do. CTE is not a mandate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Chris Walker on behalf of the California Association of Sheet Metal Air Conditioning Contractors and the California Automotive Business Coalition. Business groups who are very much interested in education policy and as it relates to career technical education. I think what Mr. Gunnarsson was trying to say is he doesn't want to be a categorical. That's the last thing they want to be is a categorical. They want to be a desired outcome from a public education system, and currently they are not. The schools are not held accountable for how many career technical education programs or pathways they provide. They are held accountable for API. They're held accountable sociologically and or by society and by politically how many kids they get to college. UC admissions. We heard earlier that if we pull back on the science requirement, that we're giving different school districts an inequitable, some different demographics are being held to a different standard and would have lesser access to college. Well, what about the kids that don't have access to CTE or vocational education today? It's only going to get worse if we're not holding schools accountable and we take away their categorical. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Ernie Silva on behalf of Sciatech High Schools. Dropout recovery schools like Sciatech have been stripped to the bone. Unlike other programs, we don't, because of our competency-based pedagogy, we're not getting partnership academy money or career tech education categoricals or others. The governor's weighted student formula will help us. We supported Assemblymember Brownlee's AB 18. We're here to ask that whatever formula, whatever approach that you end up taking, that you find a way to encourage programs like ours and incentivize school districts to do more for dropout recovery. This isn't a competition between charters and traditional schools. There are plenty of dropouts to go around. The last point is we are asking that you invest in dropout recovery. The Alliance for Excellent Education has put out data showing that for every 1,000 recovered dropouts, an additional $14 million of annual earnings are generated, and $1.7 million of state taxes are generated annually. 1,000 students recovered, $1.7 million a year
Silva.
In revenues.
You've got a great school.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your comments.
Do us a favor and let's work together to make this a budget priority.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Jim Novak. I'm the Chief Business and Financial Officer for Long Beach Unified School District, and previously was 7 years as Assistant Superintendent in Palm Springs. This afternoon, I'm speaking on behalf of Long Beach Unified and many of our colleagues, my colleagues in Los Angeles and Riverside counties. I changed my flight back 2 times today because I think it's absolutely critical that you hear directly from school districts and how we're affected by the mandate reform. Long Beach Unified is extremely supportive of the governor's proposal and is passionate about mandate reform. And in general, based upon the survey results that have been passed out to you, you'll see that the majority of the districts in LA County and Riverside County are supportive too. In the governor's proposal, he made 4 statements about what is wrong with the current system. In general, we agree with his statements, and in our survey, you'll see this. 72% of our colleagues agree with the statement that many mandates fail to serve a compelling purpose. 93% agree that the mandate determination process takes years. 86% agree that the reimbursement costs are often higher than anticipated and can vary from district to district.
Mr. Novak, we've got the survey. We don't have the time to go through it all right now, and I'm sorry about your flights. But we have this, and thank you for it. And anyone else who can't get through all their comments, if you want to submit anything, we will be happy to accept them, and we will review everything that's presented to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Dawn Kepke with McHugh Kepke & Associates on behalf of the California Adult Administrators Association and California Council for Adult Education. We appreciate the comments mentioned by the superintendent this morning relative to adult education and the severe cuts that we've endured over the last few years since flexibility. We would prefer, of any of the approaches out there now, an AB 18-like approach that at least recognizes that adult education should not be consolidated and should be perhaps considered separately from the consolidation proposals currently on the table. Thank you.
Thank you for your succinct message, Ms. Kepke.
Hi, I'm Brandon Tartaglia with Disability Rights California, and I'm speaking specifically to the governor's proposal to suspend the behavioral intervention plan requirements. We oppose that proposal because it's unnecessary. These requirements are federal. They're not a state mandate. When the federal government created these requirements, they didn't intend to micromanage the states. They gave the states a lot of latitude on how to implement these requirements. And that's what the state requirement or state law does, implement the federal requirements. In fact, we've already dealt with this issue 2 years ago. The legislature enacted AB 1610, which made it clear that the state law did nothing more than, quoting the bill, provide the clarity, definition, and specificity necessary for local education agencies to comply with the federal IDEA. Without the state guidance, there will be more inappropriate forms of negative interventions, including seclusion and very possibly dangerous restraints. We urge you to reject that proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Tartaglia.
Juliana Voris with the Urban Counties Caucus, also here on behalf of the County Welfare Directors Association, registering our opposition to the inclusion of the Fossil Youth Services Program in the Way to People formula. We understand from the latest information today that the county portion of that has been excluded in the latest governor's version of that, but we wanted to register our concern to the other funds in that program that will be kind of put up into the Way to People formula and just not given the categorical funding because these are our most vulnerable youth, and that's been a high priority for both of our associations for the past few years. We'd appreciate your consideration of excluding that population.
Thanks for your comments.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members, Brendan Tuig on behalf of the American Heart Association. We're in opposition to the governor's proposal to eliminate the physical performance test mandate. Ms. Gable did a good job explaining what the test does and some of the importance of it. But I would like to point out, as far as the obesity epidemic, that among children today, obesity is causing a broad range of health problems that previously were not seen until adulthood. And this includes high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, elevated blood cholesterol levels. And so we think that making the physical performance test voluntary means that some districts won't do it, and there'll be blind spots in the data that's collected, which will make our efforts to reduce obesity rates even harder. And we also think there'll be less opportunities to help individual students turn their health around. And so we urge you to reject the governor's proposal respectfully. We think that ultimately it'll be higher state health-related costs if we do away from with the test. And
all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Katie Valenzuela with Public Advocates, specifically talking this time about the mandates proposal. We are generally in favor of a block grant approach, although we are very concerned with the accountability measures that would need to be in place to ensure that services were actually being provided. But speaking about specific mandates, I'll associate myself with previous comments opposing the PE elimination. Regarding the truancy elimination, while your bill with now Attorney General Harris does cover a lot of those services, those wouldn't really kick in until someone was charged, and we would prefer that those services would be offered before someone faced criminal charges. And finally,
there's the delayed entry of judgment.
Yes, but we are just concerned about the timing of those services, so we'd like to discuss that with you further. And finally, the financial and compliance audits, we'd like to see that kept, particularly in light of budget constraints and potential future flexibility.
Right. Thank you, Katie.
Alicia Sanchez with the California Center for Public Health Advocacy. We join the Superintendent of Public Instruction and our colleagues at the Heart Association in opposing the elimination of the physical fitness testing. And I would just point out that this is obviously a health issue, but it does have a relationship to education, an important one. Obesity has been associated with several indicators for poor performance at school, including absenteeism, lower GPA, and dropping out. And so we would encourage consideration of maintaining this mandate and look forward to continuing to work with you on that.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Robert Miyashiro representing the Education Mandated Cost Network. 3 brief points. First, on the list of proposed mandates to be eliminated, we urge you to consider the underlying policy issues, not simply the costs, and I'm sure you will do that, particularly graduation requirements, behavioral intervention, and truancy. Second, I'd like to just address the legislative analyst's recommendation to you to eliminate the option to claim under the current system. We think the governor's proposal is well thought out, particularly because this now becomes an optional set of mandates. And so if the governor says you can choose to participate under either option, either claiming option, we think it provides for much more likelihood that your policies underlying those mandates will be fulfilled. If you adopt the legislative analyst's recommendation to provide only one option, there will be many districts, I don't know how many, who will opt not to participate at all, and I think then you lose the underlying policies of those mandates. So we urge you to retain the option. And finally, I'd like to address a point that they'll...
Mr. Miyashiro, I'm sorry, your time has expired.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff Baca, representing CASBO. Like Senator Simitian began the hearing with this morning, we believe that the governor's proposal on the weighted student formula is a solid starting point. We do have concerns about starting this conversation and implementing a system from the deep hole that we now find ourselves in. And then lastly, I would add that many of the comments from committee members today on issues such as pitting districts against districts, holding districts harmless, and maximizing district flexibility in the use of funds are consistent with CASBO's position on broader funding reform. And we hope to work with you and serve as a resource for you moving forward.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aka.
Samantha Tran with Children Now, and I just want to say ditto to a number of the comments around that this is an important time to have this conversation and implement a new framework around our finance system, that we need to hold districts harmless, and that we need to think about these assurances to ensure that students and schools that generate the dollars receive the benefit of those dollars. The one thing I would add, though, is that I think to really have the impact that we're desiring around this new finance system, we need to couple it with true transparency, and that can be done based on our existing standardized account code structure. It's just going to require some tinkering with that system and working with stakeholders to make sure we have some uniform definitions across the state so that we can really track at the site level the kinds of services and support kids are receiving, and we think it's paramount to fulfill the vision around a new finance system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tran.
Deborah Brown with the California School Boards Association. We do support weighted student formula conceptually. However, as been commented by previous speakers and in the questions during the presentations, we do have some concerns with the way that this model is proposed to be implemented, and that is twofold in terms of the starting point being right now when we are at such a low funding point, and how that impacts how we grow forward, and the other issue is also the issue of having winners and losers, and we don't think that there should be anybody losing in this. We should be building up on the system, not starting from a low point and having people lose. And then we do question the timing of it and are concerned about even beginning to implement it at 5% in this year, and think we really need to spend more time to really evaluate what we're looking for, make sure we do have the right weights, make sure that all of the issues are addressed, and this can be done in the next year or two. Give districts time to plan for it, and we can then implement it effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Round.
Mr. Chair and members, Ian Padilla representing the Small School Districts Association, and we appreciate the governor taking on this difficult and substantive issue. But we do have some concerns about the transportation piece, and I think it's been highlighted in the course of this hearing today. It's a big issue for the small rural schools, and so we'd like to work with you going forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Padilla.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Lilly, and I'm a parent, and I live in Antelope, California. I've seen firsthand the difference that transitional kindergarten has made, and also what happens when children don't have access to this important learning opportunity. My oldest son, Shane, was born November 30th. He was the youngest child in 80 children in his kindergarten in his school. He struggled because he was not as coordinated as the other children, and his motor and social skills were not as developed. When a kid is having a difficulty just learning to hold the pencil, imagine how he must feel when faced with writing a paragraph. He was frustrated, hated writing, and he felt like a failure. In the end, he ended up being retained in first grade because it was clear that he was still lagging behind. My younger son, Hunter, was also a fall baby. I was determined that he would not struggle as Shane did, so I approached my district, Center Joint Unified, to pilot the transitional kindergarten class this year, and they did. Hunter is now thriving in his TK class. He's been given time to focus on letter formation and build the foundations of literacy.
Cheryl, the class, if you could conclude, I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you. I'm here to ask you to keep the current law in place. You've made a commitment to parents that every child in every district will have this opportunity, and we ask you to hold your ground.
Thank you for coming today.
Hi, thank you, Chairman and Senators. My name is Scott Moore. I'm with Preschool California. 40,000 parents of 40,000 children are not sure whether or not their kids are going to go to kindergarten in the fall because of the proposed cut to transitional kindergarten. We strongly oppose that. Of those 40,000 kids, 40% are English learners. Nearly two-thirds are in Title I schools. We can't let this opportunity go by. Transitional kindergarten doesn't cost the state any new money. And the proposed savings really, we think, are not real. So we respectfully ask for your rejection of that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Senators. My name is Laura Fair. I'm the Education Rights Director for Public Counsel Law Center. And while we take no position and, in fact, support some of the governor's mandate elimination proposals, there are a few that we are very, very concerned about and opposed because they would directly impact the fundamental right for students to access school, to educational opportunity, and to due process. The ones we are very concerned about include elimination of caregiver affidavits and the requirement to actually enroll children who are living with their relatives or their non-relative caregivers, elimination of any due process protections for students. We already have 750,000 suspensions in California, way too high and much higher than most states. The elimination of the County Board of Appeal hearing process for students being expelled, elimination of minimal due process protections for students and parents facing fines and potential jail time for truancy violations, and the elimination of any section that would impact the timely and immediate transfer of records to foster youth. We also question the inclusion of behavioral intervention plans because there were amendments in 2010 and 2011 that were supposed to eliminate those mandate costs. And finally...
Thank you. Ms. Farron, if you could conclude right
yes,
now.
And finally, we are very concerned about the requirement that would be eliminated for science that could affect UC and CSU enrollment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tiffany Mock on behalf of the ACLU. Thank you so much for this time. At this time, we don't have any official positions, but we're working with our colleagues at Public Counsel, Youth Law Center, and Fight Crime and Invest in Kids to evaluate all the different eliminations of the mandates. One that we specifically noticed and we think is an oversight and mistake is an elimination of the audit provisions in the Williams settlement. The audits relate to ensuring students have sufficient textbooks, teachers are not misassigned, and there's enough information for parents provided on the SARC. So we'll continue this discussion, and thank you again.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Ma.
Hello, Barry Becker, Fight Crime, Invest in Kids. Our law enforcement leaders are concerned about dropout prevention. Dropout prevention is crime prevention, and so we're particularly concerned about parents being notified early about truant students' services being provided. And we do understand there is a very legitimate concern about the overuse of suspension in many cases, and it might be worth looking at without eliminating any of the due process protections for students, looking at whether it would be sufficient just to go by the federal mandates on suspension and not have any particular state mandates on schools. Thank you very much. I want to make sure to mention, of course, the most effective dropout prevention strategy is high-quality early learning, preschool and transitional kindergarten as well. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Ms. Becker.
Mr. Chair and members, Khadija Alam Javed with the Advancement Project. Just a couple of suggestions that we believe will make the governor's proposal on weighted student formula stronger. We believe that the weighted funding should follow the students and not be left up to the district's discretion. Number two, rather than average daily attendance, we believe that the weighted funding should be based on enrollment. This will help schools struggling with high truancy rates. And number three, the funding formula should also take into consideration grade span adjustments to reflect increased costs of high schools. And lastly, we're in opposition of governor's proposal to eliminate the requirement of transitional kindergarten program for all the reasons stated by Preschool California. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alan-Javi.
Hi, Catherine Anderson on behalf of the Southwest Transportation Agency. We're here today. We have 12 school districts that we serve in rural Fresno County. 7,000 students every day are transported to school. And our free and reduced lunch rate is approximately 90%. And without the school bus, majority of our students would not be able to get to class. And we would just like to say that we are opposed to the elimination of transportation altogether. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
My name is Steve Rhodes. On behalf of Santa Ana and San Bernardino, I want to say we're in strong support of the block grant and of the focus on English language learners and free and reduced lunch. That gets the money to poor kids, to needy kids, and that is extremely important. On behalf of the School Transportation Coalition, we are opposed to the permanent elimination of school transportation. And one last point on grade levels. Kids in high school cost more to teach. It's just the way the high school's structured, and that's not taken care of in the governor's proposal. I'm hopeful that they will change that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes.
Rito Garrett, State Director, Mission Readiness. I just want to reference a letter that we dropped off to each one of your offices yesterday on the fitness grant. We're in opposition to the governor's proposal to eliminate that. And I just want to add to that letter, at the end of it, we state that it takes years, not months, to build a healthy body. And the surprising fact is that today's soldiers are much more likely to be evacuated out of Iraq or Afghanistan for a serious sprain or stress fracture than for a combat wound. And these types of injuries represent a quarter of all injuries out of theater today. I forgot to mention Mission Readiness, national security organization made up of over 275 retired generals and admirals nationwide, with 19 in the state of California and 1 former TAG. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Roach. I am a mandated cost analyst for the Twin Rivers Unified School District. Our school district has 24,000 students in it. Our current claim levels are $2.4 million annually. The governor's proposal will reduce our claim totals to $800,000. I also wanted to address one of the elephants in the room as far as district participation in mandates. The legislature has failed to fund mandates on an annual basis for have only funded mandates on an annual basis 3 of the last 9 years. Hence, and at the same time, increase the minimum claim levels from $200 to $1,000, excluding smaller school districts. That's a very big reason why mandates are not being filed by many school districts. If you'd like more information, I would be more than happy to contact you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roach.
Adonai Mack with the Association of California School Administrators. Just 3 points on the weighted student formula proposal. First, their districts have a 20% reduction in funding, and so we believe that part of that, or at least needs to be phased in to restore some of that reduction in funding with a deficit factor. 2, we need an infusion of resources. As everyone has said, it needs to be a hold harmless. That has to happen. And then 3, we believe that some programs should be excluded. Generally, any programs that would serve students outside of the core program, so things like adult ed, ROCP, community day schools, juvenile court schools, and home-to-school transportation are things that should be excluded. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Spence Runberg from Time for Kids, an advocacy organization, and I wanted to talk to you about one of the categorical funds that has not been discussed today, which is the Early Mental Health Initiative, which is funded by Prop 98 funds through the Department of Mental Health in schools. And Department of Mental Health is going away. Apparently the money was funded, but it has no home right now. And it's done through grants for kindergarten through 3rd grade. And right now there are some 3-year grants that have been promised to schools, and 140 of them this year. And about 1/3 of those will end in June. But 2/3 of those are hoping to have funds, but there's no home for the Early Mental Health Initiative at this point. And we're hoping that it doesn't get thrown into the block grant, because it's an effective program that works for 80% of the kids and has served over 500,000 at-risk children in kindergarten through 3rd grade over the past 20 years. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Runberg.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Patty Herrera, representing the 23 school districts of Riverside County, as well as our County Superintendent, Ken Young. We support the governor's mandate reform proposal and commend him for his leadership in this area. While we certainly certainly support a block grant proposal, one of the things that we really like about the governor's proposal is that it offers districts choice. For those who want to continue with the current mandates claims process, they're welcome to do that. The districts of Riverside County have indicated that they would opt into a block grant proposal, and we support that, and we urge you to seriously consider the governor's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herrera.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. Moira Top on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association Advocates. We join the chorus in support of the broad concept of the weighted student formula. We think that it is certainly a proposal that is consistent with something we've advocated for some time, and that's that the money should follow the student, the child, rather than the bureaucracy. We certainly share the superintendent's comments made earlier when he indicated that the funding formula should be equal, whether or not you're a student in a traditional public school or a charter public school. And the LAO recently identified a $400 difference between traditional schools and charter schools, and we look forward to working with you on the arduous task as we move forward to craft this difficult proposal, but we think the time is right now to do it. Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Top.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Jennifer Moreno. I'm with the California Federation of Teachers. CFT understands and supports the goals of greater equitability, increased transparency, and reduced complexity in the school finance system, but also believes that the conversation regarding redesigning and reallocating school funding needs to begin with full restoration of the over $18 billion in cuts to education. We also believe that the appropriate place for this conversation is through the legislative policy process. Questions regarding who will benefit and how this will occur need this careful deliberation. An example of why this issue should be discussed in policy committee is the fact that the administration's proposal excludes preschool from the student-weighted formula because preschool serves a population outside of the K-12 population. For this same reason, adult education should also be taken out of the flexibility student-weighted formula. We also oppose any changes to the law or funding that would result in the denial of eligible children to participate in the transitional kindergarten program.
Thank you, Ms. Moreno.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Thank you. Joe Rombold on behalf of San Bernardino, Santa Clara, and San Diego County Office of Education in support of comments made regarding deliberations on these proposals be taken up in Education Policy Committee. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Ramo.
Good afternoon. Barrett Snyder on behalf of the San Francisco Unified School District. For a lot of the reasons mentioned, both of these proposals have a lot of complexities to them. We think that ought to be taken in the policy committee, so we support that. On behalf of the California Association for Regional Occupation Centers and Programs, the California Association for the Gifted, and the California Association of School Counselors, we think that the weighted student formula conversations about which services we're going to decide to make completely flexible and which ones we're not, that definitely belongs in a policy committee, and we support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
Mr. Chairman, members, Steve Henderson representing the California School Employees Association. First, I'd like to thank the administration for returning school transportation funding in the budget year. However, we are opposed to the elimination of funding after that. I'd also like to suggest, as was discussed here among the members, that the drastic change in the weighted student formula is a conversation that needs to happen in policy committee, not in budget committee. I think it's important because it is very important to look at what these programs, these categorical programs, the populations that they currently serve, and what the impact will be on those populations should you eliminate those programs and put them as one funding source. We think that's very important. We don't think you have enough time to really look at the impacts here in Budget Committee, so we would suggest that. The other thing that we would suggest finally is, while we appreciate that the legislature and the administration is trying to deal with the budget in this post-flexibility environment. But what we would suggest is that before we can even have the conversation about flexibility, we need to recognize that education has lost over $20 billion since 2008. And before we can have that conversation, we should work to restore that money. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Jeff Frost, representing the California Association of Suburban School Districts, and thanks to all of you for your patience. Related to the weighted student formula, I would align myself with Superintendent Beckler's comments this morning regarding restoring the base before we move to a weighted student formula. I think that's key in terms of purchasing power and everyone's ability to educate children in a reasonable way. Putting it in a policy committee, I think, is also the best way to deal with that. On the mandate issue, our association can support the sort of bifurcated approach. The issue related to the Constitution was raised. If there are school districts who want to fully claim, I think the Constitution provides them that option. But the bifurcated approach, I think, creates flexibility. To that end, in the block grant process, we would want to make sure that the audit process was reasonable and was not cumbersome. I think Senator Emerson's bill from last year has an approach there that's reasonable. If you try to put 24 mandated programs in the audit guide, I don't think that's workable.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. The last word.
I think I'm the guy you're looking for, right? I am John Chocholak, and I represent, I'm a field rep for the Small Manufacturers Institute. We are a nonprofit that support manufacturing programs and shop programs throughout California schools. Through the years, there's been a lot of waves of budget cuts due to a lot of reasons, and these have closed a lot of these shop programs. There's very few left at this time. Manufacturing sees a disaster if we see the last of these programs close in our schools, and that's about ready to happen. They're on the edge right now. Our economic prosperity requires specific trade skills to be taught in these shop programs, and we now have a gap showing up with the students coming out of high school and community college who have the ability to go and fill these trade skills that are needed to manufacture and build things here in California.
Thank you, sir. We've got the point.
Thank you very much for letting me speak.
You bet. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to everyone. That was a good round of public comment, and I think many of the points we raised during the hearing were reiterated. And think the public comment also underscores why we never get around to really dealing with the mandate situation, because it impacts so many issues, it impacts so many constituencies. And so what the governor has proposed is bold, and I think I would also weigh in on the benefit to reviewing much of the detail, not just on mandates, but on the weighted student formula as well in policy committee. So that is yet to be determined. In any case, thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to my committee members and my great vice chair for sticking with it. And we will be back 1 week from today with our next overview hearing. Thank you. We're adjourned.